Hello everyone, my name is Joey,
And mine is Max.
and welcome to the third and final episode of Grandpa Stories.
In this episode, we will be interviewing Joey's grandpa, Mr. Shaw, a retired teacher and military veteran.
We will be discussing funny stories from his early life, the military, and his teaching career.
To kick off the show, how are you doing today, Mr. Shaw?
Better than I deserve, just like every day.
So, could you tell us a little bit about your early life and what it was like growing up?
I grew up in a small town in Iowa called Ladora. Had 300 people in it. Everybody knew everybody in the town, or everybody was related to everybody else. I went to a small school that was there up through the 8th grade, and then went to high school in the town to the west of us, 7 miles, called Victor. The school district was called HLV. Played football, basketball, tennis. My dad ran a service station up until I was the 8th grade, and then Pop became a rural mail carrier for the rest of his working life. We lived there up until I went to college and then got drafted, and they lived there till they passed in 02 and 06.
What friends did you have growing up?
Okay, I had my best friend lived down the street from me a little ways. His name was Tim Daniels. We grew up together. I've known him since I was 5 years old. He's a retired MD doctor up in Storm Lake, Iowa. I have another good friend that Dick York. We grew up together, and he lives down in North Carolina right now. Comes back every summer, and we spend a couple of weeks golfing together. My other best friend was a man by the name of Kirk Muller, and he is deceased and went home to be with the Lord maybe 15, 20 years ago. He died of cancer, and he was a pastor down in Beaumont, Texas. And I had other acquaintances and everything, the kids I played basketball with and did things in school with, music stuff and quartet and double quartet and glee club and that kind of stuff. But those were my three best friends, probably.
What were some funny things that happened with those friends when you were growing up?
One of them was Tim Daniels. We were seniors, and we were going to what they called the Senior Awards Night. It was in May before we graduated, and we were running just a little bit late. So we park our car and get out of our car, on our way into the gym where the award assembly was, and a bird crapped on his head. That was kind of hilarious. I don't know really much other humor. Oh, one time, I don't know if this is humorous or not, but again, I was a senior, and my friend Dick York had a girlfriend that went to a neighboring school, Belle Plaine, Iowa, to the north of us, about 10 miles or so. And we were we had study hall together, and so we were helping the coach out and got checked out of study hall. We got to laughing and joking around and said, we should call Belle Plaine and ask to speak to your girlfriend. So we went up into the coach's office and called the high school office over in Belle Plaine and made like we were somebody important and asked to speak to, I think her name was Colette. And she came to the phone, and Dick talked to her for a while, and we laughed and joked about that. Never did tell anybody else about it.
You mentioned a lot of sports. Did you have a favorite sport growing up?
Probably football. I played football 4 years, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. I played every position except center and quarterback in those 4 years. Basketball was okay. I never played baseball. I didn't seem to click with that. I could field okay, but I wasn't a very good batter. I was afraid of the ball. So, and then I played tennis as a junior and senior. We had a real small school, but we had a man who was the principal in the elementary school where we went up through the 8th grade, and Mr. Vincent taught us how to play tennis on an indoor court on the gym floor. and we were never very good, but we had the best time. There were maybe five, six guys, and there were 4 or 5 girls, and we just had a good time playing
Sounds
tennis
awesome.
there. And then after we graduated, it died, didn't go any farther.
So, what was your schooling like growing up? Did you have a big class, small class? Did you like your teachers? Anything like that?
My graduating class had about 52 kids in it. The school itself probably didn't have much more than maybe 200 kids, 9 through 12. I didn't like the classroom stuff very much. I basically went to class so I could do sports and the extracurricular stuff. If I had a favorite teacher, it probably was my shop teacher as a freshman, Mr. Rocky. He was not only was he a good teacher, but he was a Christian man, and we used to hold Bible study in his house when I was a freshman, I think, for a year or so there. But other than that, it was okay. Got along there with everybody. I got detention a couple of times, but no big deal.
What were your detentions for? Just not doing your work or showing up late?
Nope. You wouldn't believe it. I got detention for chewing gum in class. Yep, that's right. Chewing gum. I got detention one night. They didn't let you chew gum in school. That was dumb. But that's the way it was in 64 or 63.
That was still a rule today. Half the kids in our school would have detention.
Yep.
You walk
I
around and
know.
everyone's
I know.
chewing gum.
Yep, I know. I even had a teacher, my geometry teacher. He thought I was chewing gum, and I was, but I had a way of slipping my gum up over my teeth on the upper side of my mouth.
Yep.
And he actually walked back and made me open my mouth and look in it, because he knew he'd seen me chewing gum, but he couldn't find any, but it was in there. But he never did find it or see it. But yep, chewing gum was a big deal back in those days.
That's funny. Now to transition a little bit. When were you drafted into the military?
I was drafted in November of 1966. I went by bus from my hometown to Des Moines, Iowa, spent the night there. The next day they put us on a train all the way down to Fort Bliss, Texas, which is in El Paso, Texas. And I stayed there a month while they gathered 5 or 6 guys here and 5 or 6 guys there, got 40 of us. Put us on 2 buses, took us up to Fort Carson, Colorado, which is still there. It's outside of Colorado Springs. Stayed there for about 13 months, and then they shipped me to Germany for the remainder. I was only drafted for 2 years, so 24 months. But I went to Germany, and then I got early separation, early release to go back to college. And I got married while I was in the service in 1967, about not quite a year after I was drafted.
Were you happy or disappointed about being drafted?
Oh, I wasn't very happy about it. I had a good job at the time. I was enjoying life. I was a young single guy. I had a serious girlfriend. And of course, Vietnam was going on, and a lot of guys that got drafted, they ended up over there. I didn't, but a lot of guys did, and that's just something you dealt with. But nope, I wasn't too crazy about it. But it is what it is. You had to. I wasn't one of those that was going to run to Canada like some guys did. There were a few, not that I knew any personally, but in the country at that time, there were quite a few guys going to Canada to get away from the draft. But you just bit the bullet and went ahead and did it.
So, what did you do in the military?
Well, for the first, the first 2 months, 4 months, three to 4 months, I was just an infantryman, which means I marched and I shot a rifle and They taught us how to throw grenades. They taught us how to shoot a bazooka. They taught us how to shoot a 50 caliber machine gun. And then after about 3 or 4 months of that, they took all the cooks that were in the mess hall and they shipped them out. So they needed a bunch of new cooks. Well, I had some friends that were Iowans from Iowa, and 4 or 5 of them ended up being cooks. And I was down there one day eating lunch or breakfast or something, and one of them says, "This is really a good deal being a cook. You get every other weekend from Friday noon to Monday noon off, and you work a day and then you're off a day." And anyway, so they said, "You ought to check this out." So I talked to the mess sergeant, and then I ended up cooking from I don't know, let's see, that would have been January, maybe February, March or April to December when I got shipped to Germany. And then when I got shipped to Germany, I went back in the infantry, and I ended up driving an armored personnel carrier. They called them an APC. And I did that for the rest of the time I was over in Germany.
Wow, that's awesome. So, what was it like being a cook in the military? Did you have any favorite meals to prepare or favorite things to prepare? Was it difficult making all that food?
No. They the military had the cookbooks all written up and spelled out, and you followed the cookbooks righteously. You didn't vary. You didn't experiment. You didn't anything. The mess sergeant wouldn't allow that. So I remember one Thanksgiving we cooked 11 20-pound turkeys because we were the only mess hall open in that area on the fort. So all the people that were still around, they came to our mess hall to eat Thanksgiving dinner. And that was quite interesting. We actually used the ovens in the mess hall next door to us, but it was closed, but we used their ovens and that kind of thing. But you followed the recipes pretty righteously. You didn't vary them too much. And you cooked for about, I would say 130, 140 guys 3 times a day.
Huh. That's a lot of cooking. So,
Yep.
You mentioned meeting your wife while you were back in the States. How did you meet her?
When I was a freshman at Kirksville from 65 to 66, I didn't date much because I didn't have any money to go dating or go to a movie or whatever else. And there was a young lady who graduated with me from HLV, and she and this girl were what they called suite mates. So there were 2 girls in one room and 2 girls in another room, and they shared a common bathroom between the 2 rooms. So they called them suite mates. Her name was Nancy, and Nancy called me up one night and said, "Hey, it was raining, and I had a friend that had a car. She knew that. She said, so-and-so would like you, would you go up to the ice cream place and get us a couple of peppermint malts. I asked Rick Bale, my friend, if he'd drive me up, and he said, yeah. And so I went over to get their money, and Nancy was there along with this pretty little lady called Dee Maupin, and so I got their money and talked to Rick about the other girls a little bit, and she said, yeah, she was a nice girl, and he had her in a class earlier the first quarter, but said she was a little skinny for him, and blah, blah, blah. So I got the malts and came back, gave them to him, went back to my dorm room, and I was sitting around, and I called Nancy, and I said, hey, you think that girl that was with you think she'd go out with me? And she said, why don't you ask her yourself? I said, well, put her on the phone, and I will. So we went to a movie that weekend, and about a little over a year later, we ended up getting married. So, yep.
So to transition a little bit, where and when did you start your teaching career?
When I got sent to Germany, my wife lived with my parents for a couple of months. That was in January of 68, actually February. And then she decided about April or May that she did not want to be a waitress for the rest of her life. And so she packed up the car and went down to Kirksville. She had 2 years. She actually completed her sophomore year while I was in the Army before we got married. So she went back to Kirksville, found a place to live with some other ladies, one or two whose husbands were in the Army. And she did summer school down there. And that's when I decided that I think I could teach history because I liked history and I think I could do a good job with that. And so I got to thinking about getting out early, and so she was down there and she found us an apartment, and I got out of the Army early. And in '68 I went back to college. Well, she graduated in January of '70 because she was ahead of me. And so she went to work in Mexico, Missouri, her hometown, in a Catholic school. She taught part-time the first year, and then she taught full-time the second year. She was 2 years ahead of me. And then I graduated in '71, student taught in Mexico High School, the high school that my wife Dee went to and graduated from. I student taught there. And looking for a job. A lot of history people, the jobs in history were hard to come by in 1971. And we got told about from some friends actually friends of Dee's mother and father in Mexico, Missouri. Their son was a teacher in Troy, Missouri, and he said there was an opening in the history department. So I called down there, made an appointment to go do an interview the following Saturday. We both went down, interviewed for the high school position, pretty much got it, and he said, oh, by the way, he said, I think there's an opening in junior high for a history teacher. So the high school principal called the junior high principal. The junior high principal talked to my wife on the phone, never met her, just talked to her a little bit and offered her the job, and we went away thinking we had one job and ended up with two jobs, and that was 1971, and I retired in '99, and then Dee retired in 2000, and that's where we stayed the whole time. Troy, Missouri.
When you were younger, maybe going into college or end of high school, did you have a job that you thought you'd go into, that you were hoping to go into, a profession?
Let's see. I enjoyed farming. I helped my first cousin, Bill Feller. I helped him on the farm starting in the 8th grade. So 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. I loved doing farm work. I really liked farm work. And I actually worked on a farm north of Kirksville when I was in college in Kirksville, Missouri. I did that for a couple of years. And the guy even asked me if I'd be interested. He was a farm manager, not the owner, but the farm manager. And I thought, farm manager, you don't own anything. If they sell it, you're out, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, no, that's not for me. And I had a little emotional growing up, I don't know what you'd call it. When I was 18, working at a Manor Refrigeration, I quit. You'll love this. I quit. I walked out of the plant at supper time in the middle of the night, didn't tell anybody. I went over to Cedar Rapids the next day, did a physical, and got a job working at Wilson Meatpacking. I worked 1.5 nights at Wilson Meatpacking and decided that was enough of that. And I told myself, I can go back to Amana. I will apologize. I will beg them to give me my job back. And so I did. The very next day, I went back to the personnel office, told them who I was, told them I was stupid, I was dumb. I learned my lesson. I apologized to them. I asked them if they'd consider hiring me back. They hired me back. I was working in the factory 30 minutes at a different job, and my old line foreman came over, grabbed me, put me back on the job I was doing before, and that's where I was when I got drafted. But other than farming, I probably could have worked at Amana, I don't know, but farming I would have enjoyed, but those are about the only two things prior to teaching.
Do you have any random funny stories from any point of your life? Interesting, not just funny, but anything cool?
Oh, you mean from teaching or just from my life?
Just anytime.
Funny stories from my life. Well, there's a time I taught a freshman class of American history with my pants unzipped for 30 minutes. That was kind of embarrassing and kind of interesting and whatever else. That was the only time that ever happened, by the way. I learned my lesson the hard way. Golly, funny. I know the one thing my wife and I did one Halloween. We had these very good friends. We lived in, built a house north of Troy, 6 miles. We lived in the country. So we had these very good friends that lived in town, and it was Halloween. And we got the idea to dress up. And I had a Frankenstein mask, and she had an old man's mask, and we put on different clothes and everything else. So we went to this friend's house, and we rang the doorbell for trick or treat. And rather than speak, because I knew they'd know my voice, and I had fake gloves on that looked like gnarly fingers and everything, so I just stuck out my hand asking for candy. And my friend's name was Sue, and she looked at us and whatever else, and she goes, "My, you're a big one, aren't you?" And so she went back and got the candy and brought it back and gave it to us, and we walked away, and we laughed and laughed and laughed. And there were some kids in the driveway, and I went to give them the candy that I got, and I looked so scary that they ran off. They didn't want anything to do with me. So then we went back to the door and rang it again, and then we said something, and we went inside and we laughed about that, like crazy, whatever else. And then there was one time when it was after church Sunday night, and these same two people, Bruce and Sue Harger, they were members of the private swimming pool that was just a couple, 200 or 300 yards from their house in Troy. So they had but they had reserved the pool for the teenagers for after church. And so they were up at the pool with the teenagers and a couple other couples and whatever else. And so I just took it upon myself, and I invited 3 or 4 couples down to their house, and I cooked some hot dogs on the grill on the back, and somebody looked down and said something about Bruce. He said, "Who's that? Somebody's down at your house. What are they doing down there?" He said, "Oh, that's just y'all having a party down at our house." So anyway, that was kind of humorous a little bit. They didn't think much about it, but other people did. But yeah.
That's funny.
Did you, in your teaching profession, ever have a student do something just outlandish and crazy?
Oh, let's see, outlandish and crazy as a student. I had one student in 28 years that I was a little bit scared of. He ended up in prison.
Oh.
Let's see, outlandish and let's see. We moved to the new building in 96, so this had to have been 94 or 95, I'm not sure, maybe 96 even. And I used, you know what a dowel rod is? A dowel rod is a stick that's perfectly round, that's about as big around as your finger.
Yep.
And I used that in my classroom as kind of as a pointer. It was about 3 foot long, and I would point to stuff on maps and that kind of stuff. And sometimes if a kid went to sleep, I'd smack it underneath his desk and wake him up. And so there was this group of guys that got together. I don't even know who they were now. I still don't know. But they referred to themselves as the Swine Club. And so they got together and they made themselves known as the Swine. And they kidnapped my stick one time, and they left me a ransom note and said, "If you want to see your stick again, you'll leave a half a dozen donuts such and such a place and blah, 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 or we'll grind your stick into a toothpick." And of course, I went along with it. I left the donuts like I was supposed to, they put the stick back in my room sometime the next day or whatever else. And I still have it down in my office in the basement of the house. I was given an official honorary membership to the Swine Club. And to this day, I don't know who they were, but I know they were some of the guys. But and then there was a time for homecoming. One year, I was one of the few high school teachers. They didn't have football at Troy when I started teaching. So they decided at homecoming to have a powder puff game. So they played the freshmen and senior girls against the sophomore and junior girls. I was one of the few faculty members that knew football, so they asked me to coach one of the teams. And so I did, and I said whatever else, and I think we got beat, but that's okay. But anyway, I remember I was on the sidelines, and you know how guys are when they play athletics. Sometimes they get excited and they do this or do that and whatever else, and they pat the other guy on the rear and tell him,
Oh, no.
that kind of stuff. So I sent this girl in with a play on the sidelines in front of the student body. Thank goodness nobody saw it. And I was so used to doing that with football and basketball and everything else, I didn't think anything about it. So I sent her in with a play, and I patted her bottom. She walked in and ran off to the gym, and I thought, holy cow, what did I just do? I patted it, and thank goodness nobody saw it. They were too busy watching the game, and whoo, that one about did me in. That was the only, whoo. I would get myself fired. But no, nothing ever happened. I lost that year. Next year we did it again over on the football field, and my girls won that one, so I got better. That was the only 2 years they did that.
Hopefully didn't spank anyone.
Those girls were mean. Woo. Some of those girls used that powder puff football game to take some frustrations out on some of the other girls. You betcha they did. They were tough. Those senior girls, woo, they got serious.
To wrap up, what is some life advice that you have for the younger generation?
I had a cousin that graduated back in 1952. His name was Carroll Shaw, and everybody called him Shorty because he was short. And in those days, in the yearbooks that they published, and of course there were only like 9 or 10 kids at the class. And it was real small, real small, before the school consolidated with 2 or 3 other towns. And each kid was to give a statement or a quote. And I'll never forget that Shorty wrote next to, he had it printed next to his name, or gave them his quote. And I guess, even though that's, my goodness, what is that, 70 years? That's over 70 years ago. And Shorty's deceased now, but his quote and his thing to remember as a graduating senior, and he told everybody else, he said, never worry, never fret. If you can't remember, just forget. I've never forgotten that, and I don't know why. That's trivial, but I don't know. As far as counsel to the young, advice is worth what it costs.
We want to thank you all for listening to our podcast. Unfortunately, this will be the last episode of Grandpa Stories, but make sure to check out some of the podcasts our classmates made this semester. There's some really great ones.
Through all of our episodes, we heard plenty of hilarious stories, but just as important, we heard all of the wisdom that these grandpas had to share with us. Throughout all 3 episodes, our grandpas have advised us to keep an open mind for opportunities, pursue what you think best, and connect yourself with a mentor for advice. And don't worry, don't fret, and if you can't remember, just forget.
Thanks for listening to Grandpa Stories.